Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Govs on the Go Alumni Edition, a podcast featuring alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzz Hoon. I'm the Dean of the college. I'm also the host of the podcast. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Alan Mearns, who graduated from Austin Peay with a master's degree in music back in 2003. Alan, so glad to have you on the podcast. This is something I've been looking forward to for a while.
Great to be with you, Buzz. Yeah.
So, before we begin your interesting story, won't you give everybody a life update? Tell everybody where you are and what's going on.
Well, I currently live in a wee town in North Carolina called Hickory. That's kind of, I guess, between Charlotte and the mountains. So, I live close there with my family. Got two wonderful adult kids, Ravel and Dorian, and my wife Carrie. And we live here just in the Piedmont of North Carolina, where I spend my time writing and arranging music and writing songs and poetry. And, that's pretty much it. My wife's an ESL teacher, kind of an ESL angel. And my son's a burgeoning composer and classical pianist. My daughter, she does animation. So she's studying art and literature in college, and with kind of the idea to maybe be some kind of film author or write children's books, or both.
So the creative spell continues on through your family. That's great.
Yeah. Not my fault. It's genetics, I guess. But the kids they have a good head on their shoulders as well,
Absolutely. And I'm sure that's attributed to your wife for that part.
Completely and utterly, 100% and only.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your experience with your family. Now, for those that don't know, you grew up in Belfast, Ireland.
Yeah, Belfast, Northern Ireland. Yeah, kind of in the middle of the troubles there, and my dad was, I guess he would say, he was kind of a successful businessman in a way, coming from a very poor area. And he had this, when he was younger, he had this kind of, I guess, this radical spiritual experience where he was kind of, he says he was arrested by God before the police could arrest him. And he became kind of like I guess, kind of a preacher, missionary type person in the middle of the culture, which is in a kind of a simmering civil war, based on religion, believe it or not. So, but he was kind of strangely folded upwards from that with his own kind of personal experience. And he started this kind of hippie church, I guess, in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I kind of grew up in that kind of atmosphere, being amongst all that stuff, but strangely kind of folded upwards from it, where we had very deliberate friendships on both sides of the troubles,
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad ended up, he felt this kind of calling, I guess, to work with these churches in America, not the kind of thing that he would have initially done, because he worked in Africa and India, and he felt much more at home with that. But we ended up moving to Houston, the armpit of the world, just in terms of the weather. Some lovely people there, and I met my wife to be there, and she followed me up to Boone, where we ended up moving to Boone, North Carolina, and she followed me up there, and we ended up getting married there in college. And even though I only lived there for like 6 years, it's still kind of like my American home in my own heart, So we live about 40 minutes from there, and get up to the mountains as often as possible. Today, for instance, is got to be in the mid 90s. and it's just terrible for an Irishman. It's absolutely desperate. So I go up
Yeah.
to the mountains, and then there's oxygen, and I feel happy.
Right.
All of a sudden, that's kind of like my, happy place.
So
Yeah.
Alan, I want to ask, and I remember asking you when you got turned on to music, and you mentioned that you started playing the violin at a very
Yes.
young age.
Yeah, I played the violin from when I was 5 until I was about 10 or 11. Well, the end of primary school, we just have two sets of schools back home. You have like your primary school, which is all the young stuff from 4 or 5 till 11. And then you go into the Harry Potter school, for the rest of it. So yeah, whenever, I guess they had, funding for the arts, and they took it kind of seriously on some degree at home. So we had, I guess, some kind of aptitude test for music, and the kids that showed the most aptitude, they would loan them violins, cellos, flutes to play. And we had this amazing guy from the Ulster Orchestra, very patient man, come and teach us, Mr. Kershaw. And so it'd be like a little group lesson, about 5 or 6 students. And if somebody had learned the pieces well, he would give them 50p, which is probably currently about $3. It's like a significant reward.
That's pretty good.
You had this kind of, a little bit of bribery. And so I did that. And then whenever I heard, I think my brother's friend came into like a youth group thing for church and picked up the guitar and played Johnny Be Good. Like he was, he was like, some kind of, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so much cooler than the violin. I have to try that. So yeah, eventually my dad just bought me a guitar, and I was just obsessed with that. It was just that's what I did. I came home from school and just made a cup of tea and went into my bedroom and played the guitar till it was dark.
So how did you get your first guitar? And was there a story involved with that? Did you have to go to your dad and say, Dad, I've decided I'm going to move
I think
to
he got it for me for Christmas. It was just like a cheap steel string acoustic. It wasn't very easy to play, but it was something. It was enough. It was just like, it just became your toy, and I also and then the next year it was like an electric guitar he got me. Not the kind that I really wanted, because I wanted one of those kind of heavy metal pointy ones, because I wanted to be like Steve Vai or something. There's all that kind of widdly guitar, electric guitar pyrotechnics going on when I was a kid. And so then the next, year after that or whatever, he even though he didn't have a lot of money, I had ordered some kind of guitar, like my ideal guitar or something that I could afford, or potentially from a certain music store. And they weren't real dealers in Ibanez guitars, apparently, and they kept kind of leading you up the garden path, and they didn't have it, and blah blah blah. So my dad got a bit frustrated, and I remember him just picking me up in downtown Belfast. I was walking down the road with my buddies, and he picked me up, and he just drove me across town to a different actual Ibanez dealer, and I'd never been in that music store, and there's just this big shrine of these guitars, the Steve Vai guitar, the Joe Satriani guitar, and he just said, just pick the one that you want, which was incredible, So I've still got that guitar,
That's great.
over at the studio, and he got me an amplifier, and it was just, of course, you had to talk them down to the lowest possible price, because he's a Scotsman, technically, he was born in Scotland, but. So yeah, that, then it was just like just people pushing you forward, and helping you, what you're interested in. So, I was like, I had to check that night and look down from my bunk bed to make sure I wasn't dreaming, the guitar was still there.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's just became your toy, and then a friend of mine often says, what you take takes you, you know. So if you put on a tool belt and you start showing up at the construction site, you might end up being a carpenter or a joiner. So it's a bit like that. It just kind of overtakes your life.
So when you moved to the U.S. and you moved to Houston, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
was there, and you just must have decided that playing the guitar was going to continue on, and
Yeah, I just couldn't help it. We all arrived in Houston with a suitcase each. I had a suitcase and a guitar, and yeah, it wasn't really something that I had a premeditation or some kind of cognitive plan. It was just something, and in a way, being that culture shock and coming to somewhere that's so kind of bipolar from Irish culture and climate. The guitar became kind of like this miniature cathedral where I would live in it, but and then my dad bought me a classical guitar when I was in Houston, just a kind of a high-end Yamaha guitar, and I just taught myself to read music, because I played very high level by ear, which is probably the most important thing for a musician. But I wanted to be able to play Bach, and my parents took me to this classical guitar music store that still exists in Houston called the Guitar Gallery. And I went and picked out some music. I got the lute suites of Bach, and and just kind of forced myself to read music out of necessity. I don't know how I did it. I just kind of did it.
I don't know how you did it either.
And my son did that himself for the piano during the pandemic, and he's like a kind of a virtuoso pianist now. So it must be something that's in there.
Yeah, there's some God-given there.
It's desire. It's just desire and love. When you love something, nothing will stop you from doing it. And so yeah,
you were a teenager at that time, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, was there ever just sort of this pull towards? Because I'm sure being a teenager, knowing how to play the guitar is a cool factor, but you also are saying I want to learn how to do classical guitar, and I'm sure people of your age, that's something different.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I just had such a kind of an intrinsic love of music. It wasn't, I guess when I was younger, maybe you thought of it with all the heavy metal stuff. It was kind of a cool factor, but I guess it was just such a deep thing. I got kind of really into Bach and stuff when I was about 12, actually, buying a cassette tape, and just really being like, my imagination was turned on a lot. So it was such a kind of a deep intrinsic motivation that it was more just like being a heroin addict or something. It wasn't
obsessed.
It was just the music itself was something that I needed, and but yeah, it's, I guess that music wouldn't have been as cool as something.
Well, yeah, I think you ended up being cool anyway, but whether or not you're anybody's cool as a teenager is a question. That's whether
right. Well, I guess I was very good at soccer, so I think I maybe that was maybe where the guitar wasn't really on people's radar. It was more like my soccer skills.
Oh, okay.
Football maybe although I still wasn't that interested in being cool. I think I spent the first year in the high school just being like completely alone. The culture shock. I used to just eat my lunch alone. And my sister just went home. She had to go home to Belfast. She couldn't hack it. And it was just me and my brother then, who was college age. So yeah, I mean, so go ahead.
No, yeah. So you're after high school. How did you? What were you thinking? Were you thinking about going to college? Were you planning to study?
Yeah, I mean, some things just happen, I guess, when you set your coordinates so kind of like fully on something, the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, just kind of throws certain things in your path. I find personally. So, for instance, when I moved to Boone, and I was doing my last year in high school, there was a wee girl in my I had an AP music theory class, and she was this lovely, friendly girl I still know called Maria Kent. And her dad was this virtuoso pianist who taught at Appalachian State, Alan Kent, and he kind of laid down a concert career just to raise a family, up in Boone. So he was like this. He was kind of like the star of the music faculty in a sense, and maybe in a way that Stanley Yates is at Austin Peay. Like, who has an international career and is a well-known person. So she actually got me in touch with Douglas James, who was just new there. It was his first year. And she was like, "Oh, there's this new classical guitarist teacher. You have to." And I'd never actually heard a classical guitar concert like in person before. I was just
Really
kind of self-taught, at a certain level there, just recordings and stuff. And so she was like, "Oh yeah, you should meet him. They're doing a faculty concert, and he's going to be playing." So I was really excited just to see like someone play the classical guitar. And so once we organized a way from my dad just to take me to his house and play for him, it was just amazing, and I just played all these pieces for him. And he kind of just became my like guitar dad, and he would teach me just for free, at the college, which Stanley has done for several people. So he was like, "Well, I have this full ride scholarship available called a Fletcher Scholarship." This family had given this big donation endowment for all the music schools in North Carolina, and so it's called the Fletcher Scholarship. That was available. One was available for each state school. So there was a big competition for this, and he was like, "You should enter this." And so I spent the whole year learning this, very difficult Paganini Caprice, for violin type thing on the guitar, and this Bach piece, and just played it all the time, and then went and did the 2-tier competition. And then the finals, you were competing against, a pianist and a saxophone player, a singer, and all this stuff. And I ended up winning it. And so that was amazing, to get, because my parents didn't have really any money to send me to school, so having a full ride was very helpful for a family.
You and I have talked about your story, and I see so many times, and I think you'd agree with this, that doors, for whatever reason, opened up along your way, and you had the courage and the insight to say, "Okay, I'm going to step through."
Yeah, at the time, whatever we're doing, it seems inevitable, and we kind of are funneled. I think we're somehow funneled in towards what you're born to do or whatever. I mean, I have that in my own kind of faith, I guess. Where there's like there's a meaning and a kind of a plot to your life, whether it's comedic or tragic or both, and so I always feel like I'm kind of stepping into something that's inevitable on some level, or if I'm sensitive to what I should be doing, in my internal life, that it will somehow kind of express itself in reality around me, so without getting too,
well, part of that
is about it,
the next door that kind of opens up is, most of the time I ask people, "How did you get to Austin Peay?" And they'll talk about whatever, and I know the answer to this one, where Stanley Yates, who's our wonderful classical guitarist professor here, happened to be in Boone, North Carolina as well.
Yeah, exactly. He was once Doug James came to Appalachian State, he immediately started the Appalachian Guitar Festival, which has become kind of one of the biggest American classical guitar festivals um, in the last. And he just retired last year, and that keeps going with Adam Kostler, who teaches there now. So Stanley was essentially like the first big guest artist there at the the very first one, and he became buddies with Doug James, I think, at some big guitar festival where Stanley was in the finals, and kind of made a big splash there. And so when I remember being in the one of the guitar classes, performance class, I think, and Doug was like, "Now this guy Stanley Yates is coming. He's a real virtuoso. You guys cannot miss this concert." He's like, there's this kind of like awe about him, and then you saw Stanley's poster and he looks like Paganini or something. And so I had this kind of anticipation, and then sure enough, we drove through. I remember it being early May. The concert was, but there was actually snow. There was like a blizzard in the mountains, which is not unusual up there to have we have a second summer here, but they kind of have a second winter apparently. And maybe it was April, maybe April, but we went through this blizzard and listened. And the Stanley's concert was just like the best guitar playing I'd ever heard. Probably still is. And he played 2 full cello suites and then these 2 modern pieces juxtaposed, and I was just blown away. It was just, so he kind of became my guitar hero right that night. And the next morning I was playing these pieces for him, and he was very helpful and encouraging. He's also from my neck of the woods. He's from Northern England, which is just across the pond, from Belfast. So we had a lot in common, culturally. And so when I got to the point of ending my bachelor's degree, I guess I was a wee bit bored of the academic world. I was, the ivory tower, and I had this kind of bug in me to write songs. So how it worked out, I had friends that had moved to Nashville, and he was like, "Well, I have some inroads in the music world," because he was a graphic designer, "and you should come over and try your hat on for doing some session work." And that seemed exciting to me. So just like, we just kind of follow those things like a dog sniffing for treats, but Doug James was like, "Well, while you're there, you should, just get your master's degree. Stanley teaches just north of Nashville." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that'd be perfect." So I called up, or Stanley called me, and he was very excited because you already kind of knew each other, and it was, it was great, just to be able to, and he just kind of became like family, since then.
And an interesting relationship developed afterwards. I'll say that. And I say that because when I see you two, you both make each other laugh, but you also are challenge each other and not afraid to provide, I think, rather honest feedback.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've always, Stanley, yeah, is when he kind of, he takes you on as a student, it's not just like a kind of, some kind of pedantic, "I'm the master and you're the little pleb coming to learn from me." He really cares about people, and so it kind of takes you on and is wherever you are and helps you. And I remember even when I played at a very high level, by the end of my master's degree, and he was excited about me going to maybe Manhattan School of Music or, somewhere to do my doctorate, a high pedigree. But it was one of those things again where I was like, I wanted to start like a band, so I'm always kind of in flux between popular music and classical music. But he was very encouraging with that, and even what I wanted to do, and I had my own intrinsic motivation to do. He supported you. So yeah, it's always been that case, and he was very instrumental in introducing me to the Beatles and on a deep level. So we share that kind of aspect too of like taking pop music very seriously, and then whenever I had my own kind of I'd say maybe about 6 years ago or so, I was trying to finish this Bach recording, partly just out of like almost like guilt from my teachers, like, oh, I did something with my skills, here it is, and that just didn't just kind of throw it away. But then it kind of became serious, this Bach project. It became more and more personal and serious with the things I was doing. And so that whole process I was doing with Stanley, talking on the phone about things and about our own personal explorations with Bach. So then, when I came to visit him about 6 years or 5 years ago, yeah, it just became where he really was encouraging me with that stuff, and he was really like a almost like a what do you call it? When somebody's helping with a birth, like a kind of
A midwife.
Midwife, yeah, he kind of midwife the whole Bach thing with me, where some of the stuff I was doing that would be kind of maybe a bit controversial. He was like, "Nah, do more," yeah, And, he's obviously an international scholar, known Bach scholar.
Absolutely.
His cello suite arrangements are the most famous, in the world, in the classical guitar world. So yeah, we've always kind of challenged each other. Even when I was a student there, I think I was doing these kind of arrangements, and he took it to be some sort of a competition. I didn't. I was there to learn from him, And he started doing all these crazy arrangements while I was there, and yeah, so we kind of just share a common bond with several things. Even if he wasn't a musician, I would probably still
Well,
be friends with him.
It says something that 20 years have passed since you graduated, and here
Yeah.
he is still. That's when I try to tell students that there's a lifelong mentorship available with our professors, and Stanley, who, as you have said, is an international scholar, accomplished performer.
So yeah,
He's just unbelievable, and yet he cares so much about his student success as well.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm always humbled by his approach, like, because even when I was there, I mean, he would never like push his ideas on you in this like authoritarian kind of pedantic way. You get some virtuosos that they're like little Napoleons, kind of force their ideas and make their students do all these things. But he was actually very interested in ideas that you had, even about technique and stuff, even though he's written maybe the best guitar technique book that exists. He would almost kind of like, it's if he would give you as much as you wanted, as much as you went after, and so on. And when I go to visit him, like, I still learn things. I just like, there's just a never ending thing where he'll have this just little insight about something, or a technical thing, or a way to practice something that has just been invaluable, So that's one of the things in terms of advice, for students, not to jump ahead, but it's one thing going to school, but it's like finding somebody to learn from that can do it. It's like if you're wanting to, I don't know, learn how the stock market works, and you get a chance to hang out with Warren Buffett or something. You know what I mean? It's like there's no amount of business school will trump Warren Buffett, or learning guitar. You know what I mean? It's so when I saw Stanley play, it was like, well, I got to learn from that guy, because he can just do it. And so how does he think? How does he solve problems? How does he think expressively? So that's kind of an underlying thing that I look for in my own life in terms of mentorship. And then it depends whether the person is kind of like a generous person or humble person, and that's just like a bonus. Like, and luckily Stanley was very, generous with his knowledge and with his life, we just became good friends.
Well, and you were a sponge, it seems like, as well, and taking all that in, growing on your own individual part. And I want to move to the next chapter because I think it's interesting. You mentioned this sort of battle between classical music and popular music, and then you had a band called Airspace. Is that right?
Yeah. I moved back to. People in Nashville they encouraged me to, they were like, "Listen, you'll do better off if you don't start a band in Nashville because it's so kind of saturated," and it's probably still the case. And just go to where you're from, like REM or from Athens, Georgia, etc. Nirvana or from Seattle, and so I just kind of did that, and it was one of the just things that just seemed to be right at the time. My brother had just kind of bought an old house down here near Hickory and redone it, and then my parents ended up building a house next to him, and so me and Carrie moved down, and our daughter Ravel was 1 year old. We lived with my parents for 6 months till we found a house, the right house. And I just kind of started, where I could, trying to form a band. I'd had it in several incarnations. Some people worked well for it and others didn't. And then we got something that seemed to kind of work, and we got that to a very high level. To the point where Rick Beato found us on MySpace, and he was a EMI producer and seemed to have all these connections and wanted to record us, and so we ended up going there and making this full record that only got released last year when he did that video about me.
So you made the whole record, but it was never released.
Yeah, the band broke up after that, and it's after, not that it wasn't particularly acrimonious or anything. It was just, it just leaves a bad taste in your mouth, when you work hard for something for so long, and then you're going to associate the art with that memory or something. And whenever the band quit, and I started doing my own solo stuff, I guess there was also more of just this was more of me artistically. I think I'd kind of developed a style, which is me and the guitar, that seemed to be more, there wasn't when I hear the band stuff, I can hear all the influences, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked about this idea of not chasing fame, not you started just doing what you were doing. You're making your music, and maybe in some ways you forgot about all that, but Rick Beato didn't forget about it.
Yeah, I was just making my music, just like, Van Gogh going out and doing his paintings. I mean, it's one of those things where you have to come to terms with, it's just, you do things because you have to, you know, and you have your own kind of drive. So your measurement of success isn't the way the world is. It's more like if I get a tune, or I do this amazing arrangement of a Chopin piece that comes to me, it's almost like this kind of stamp of approval from that world where art comes from, that more real world. And it's like a receipt that you're on the right path. So I've always just been kind of chasing the best song that I can write, or the best poem, or, just the right piece that seems to have this emotional purchase to it. that whether or not, because you can't control really success. And I'm not usually, real artists are not the best networkers or hustlers, because it's grotesque to your muse, you know, kind of self-promotion. That's something you have to learn to do anyway on some level, but it's difficult, you know, because it's kind of egregious to your spirit, and it's the opposite of the nature of art, which carries with it a knowledge that something's being given to you and you didn't make it, really, that you were just in the same room when it happened. So yeah, I mean, and then Rick, I mean, he's always kind of jumped in occasionally to help, even after the band, and he had his own things he was dealing with, you know, with the kind of collapse of the music industry. He wasn't getting these big budget EMI producing contracts and stuff. And so after the band broke up, he was like, "What are you doing, Alan? You know, send me stuff that you're," you know. And so I sent him these songs I'd been working on, and he was like blown away by this Yes, the Raven stuff, the kind of original sound, you know. And he was like, "Oh, this is awesome. We have to do a record," you know. And so he produced that first Yes, the Raven album. And he was actually going to start a record label just for me and this other guy, like a kind of a more boutique label, I guess, you know. And then there's some kind of things happened that weren't, you know, predicted, and it wasn't possible. But then recently, and whenever his YouTube channel started to get really big, I think he maybe had like 60,000 subscribers, which doesn't seem like much compared to the 3.5 million subscribers he has now.
Subscribers to his YouTube channel.
Yeah, YouTube channel. So
that's
at
huge.
one point, yeah, he had about 60,000 at one point, and he was calling me up, and he's like, "Hey, Alan, you know, this YouTube thing's really going," you know. And he was asking me if I could use one of my songs he could use to do a video about. But he just started doing all this teaching on YouTube, and he's a very knowledgeable jazz expert, and etc. So he at a certain point, you know, he would kind of call me and be like, you know, you need to do your YouTube thing seriously, you know, because it helps to have expertise, you know. And then we would just talk about things, you know. Yeah, I would talk to him about, he'd interviewed like Sting, really famous musicians and stuff. It was kind of crazy. And I would visit him sometimes. And but it got to a certain point where he got annoyed by like a TikTok phenomenon. There was some kid who got like 9 billion followers or some plays because it was just some thing pretending his mom was making up beats, something really shallow and stupid. And it annoyed him to the point where he's like, "Oh, I'm going to make a video about you, you know, blah, blah, blah." And he was all excited about the Bach thing I was doing, but he was even more excited about my songwriting, you know. So he was just trying to figure out the story of how to do it. And we chatted about it, and we kind of just talked back and forth, and he was like, "I'm doing it tomorrow," you know. You know, and I hadn't finished the Chacon video yet, and I was like, "Wait until I do the Chacon." He was like, "No, I got to do it tomorrow." And so, you know, he just spent a whole day getting that video ready, and he's really good at that. You know, he's an amazing communicator. You know, he can just riff on things, and they're much more clear than most people would do after 10 years of Toastmaster.
This video about you had 500,000 views.
Yeah, it got up to be about 500,000, and then it was like, and you know, he just kind of, what he did for me, which was amazing, he was able to bring together the disparate things that I do, you know, and bring it into kind of make sense. Because initially I was kind of a bit squeamish even about putting videos of my classical playing on my YouTube channel, because it was all about my songs and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then mixing those two worlds was a little weird for me. It still is a little strange. But he was able to bring the whole story of how we met, my songs, point people to my Spotify account. And so my Spotify went from like hardly any listeners to like 15,000 people following me on both Alan Mearns and Yes the Raven. So it was just crazy, you know. And you know, my YouTube subscribers went from like 2,000 to like 23,000 just from his little spiel, you know. And he's such a knowledgeable musician too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Stanley's really knowledgeable about pop music and classical music. Rick's very similar. He's a highly trained classical and jazz musician, but he understands what's good about any kind of music, whether it's a good pop song or rap thing. So he's not snobbish, and he understands the intricacies of what made the Bach stuff good and different and kind of revolutionary. And so then there's even like these really famous classical guitarists that were piping in about the Bach, you know, like Sergio Assad or these kind of heroes of mine growing up, these kind of guitar gods. So yeah, it was a very strange phenomenon, you know, just one day where there's kind of an agoraphobia about it too, just being so exposed in one day to all these people being interested in you. It was overwhelming. I just spent like a week responding to YouTube comments. You know? So I'm still kind of, yeah. So, you know, then I'm just in the next phase of just trying to create more art, you know, and doing the next thing, which I have in my system, you know.
Well, you and I have talked about the fact that I think you have a good understanding of the blessings that are in your life, like, for instance, your family, which you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you know about the realization of what is really to be important, and as you have said, you know, you don't seek out fame. That's not your end game.
No, it's just like, yeah, I know in my heart that on some level, even if, you know, if the music industry hadn't collapsed and we got this big record deal with the band and we went out touring 200 shows a year, I don't know what that would have done to my life. In retrospect, I can't imagine it would have been very good.
Right.
It might have been good in the world's eyes, but, you know, even in my kind of the humiliation of my own kind of failure and growth in my inner life, being able to raise both my kids and homeschooling them for several years, entering into poetry very seriously. I mean, none of these things would have happened without that kind of quote unquote failure, so to speak, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I always think of, when I think of my wife, my kids and my parents, and, you know, that in a sense I've already won the lottery, you know. And a lot of the reasons why people seek out success, you know, it probably are for some deep rooted, you know, biological, you know, drives and wanting to find the right person or to climb the ladder of, you know, success or something. So, you know, in a strange way, when you've got like the true riches, and you can recognize that you're already richer. My dad has always said, you know, your wealth is in your friends, you know. And so, you know, that's really been the case. And, you know, when I think about it too, you can always think philosophically. Like one of my favorite films is the Lars von Trier film Melancholia, which is you know, it's not a happy-go-lucky movie or anything, but it's about this kind of planet that's coming towards the Earth, you know, and how certain people react to it. These two sisters, one of them just kind of completely collapses under the weight of this impending oblivion, and the other sister, who's kind of a bipolar kind kind of the problem child. She actually has this inner strength to deal with it and comfort the child and play a pretend game and all while this planet is coming to clash with the earth. But I found when I watched that movie, I found it like a strange relief, because it put things in a very radical sense in perspective. We're all living out our lives, and there is an end coming for all of us. There is that might as well be a planet coming.
Right.
That's what every one of our inevitable deaths is, and so the idea of like just scratching and clawing for look at me, and trying to get some kind of, and then missing your actual life, and missing the true riches of love and being something genuinely to someone, you could miss in that desperation. And then you end up creating a shell of yourself too anyway, when you live that kind of life, which is so prevalent on social media. We all know that fakeness and this kind of thing that isn't real anyway. And then say you were to get profoundly well known and famous, well, that thing that is famous probably really isn't you.
Right.
It's kind of the Borges and I predicament. Borges writes that poem about Borges and me. There's this guy called Borges that has all these things happening, while me, on the other hand, I go out and get the mail and make toast in the morning. And so there's a strange kind of like philosophical darkness to that, reaching for that Promethean fire of fame. And so I'd rather genuinely be something to somebody than have this version of myself kind of, you know what I mean?
This is a deep discussion about reality and fantasy and how those things get blended.
Yeah, it's especially today, where things have obviously get out of hand with that, and so yeah, and obviously we all want to have feedback on the work that we do. Anyone that does serious work, especially like in the arts, you do it for others in pleasure or consolation. Beauty itself is an outgoing thing. In the nature of it, it's tied in with truth and love, and all arts are communicative, and people who say they aren't, maybe aren't, I don't know, maybe barking up the wrong tree. So you do want the right kind of validation, I guess, which feels good.
Yeah.
The people who know what they're doing respect you and what you're doing. But in a sense, I've always had, I have mentors like Stanley, or like my poet mentor, Adrian Rice, who it's like, if you do something that means something to them, or Rick Beato, it really doesn't matter what other people think, because you respect their opinion so much that if it's good enough for them, it's good, and the chips can fall where they may, and I kind of made up an aphorism that might be true, not sure if it's true, but I always say, like, quality takes care of itself, and if you do good work, it's rare that it's gonna not get some kind of eventual kind of validation, so to speak. But a lot of my heroes, like Bach, didn't, have any real validation in his lifetime next to what he was worth, or Van Gogh, or people like this. So as an artist, the real contract is in your inner life with, your muse or God or whatever you want to picture that, and you just do the work that you've been given to do, whether or not it gets celebrated or not. You just know that you're doing the right thing, and you're trying to respond to that ephemeral voice, that what beauty is, what truth is. So you just kind of live in that world.
One of the things we always like to ask of our guests, Alan, is, and we appreciate all the time you've given us today, is that what kind of advice do you have for students, and especially how do you? I mean, you have followed your muse, and I'm wondering how do when you're probably teaching kids young that were like you, how do you get them to follow that like you have followed?
Well, you have to. I try and teach people that, and no matter what realm you're in, whether you're a writer or a musician or a painter or an entrepreneur, I'd say the most important factor of all is creativity and being developing your imagination. You know, so that's what sets people apart. You know, say even in the guitar world or paint, you know, it's not good enough to just be highly competent, because there's thousands of highly competent people. You have to have develop the capacity for original thought and for inspired ideas that aren't just functional or utilitarian. And that requires time. It requires kind of a stability, requires good sleep, maybe some caffeine, you know, but developing that sense. And that's what is central to me, whether I'm writing songs or poetry or trying to get an inspired fingering for this Bach piece to where it's easy to play and sounds amazing. It's the same like light bulb thing. So whatever thing you're into, you know, you got to cultivate the ability for deep thought. I would say no matter what you're in, you should be have part of your time where you read things that aren't in your own sphere. So I'm very interested in, you know, science and comedians and, you know, and anything that's creative or to do with looking for reality. And so you have to cultivate your inner life. So whenever you have depth like that, when you have depth to draw from and you develop the scaffolding in your own imagination, that's why, you know, when you're a kid, you're like, why am I doing this algebra? Why am I doing this? Well, you're developing mental scaffolding and reasoning capacity. And so you have to develop these things in order for the creative act, when it comes, that there's something for it to grip hold of, you know. And so that's what I would suggest, is cultivating that, cultivate your problem solving skills with games even. I mean, I know, you know, I started playing Scrabble just to have something to do with my dad when he's in Ireland. But I got really like addicted to it. I got really good at it. But I could swear that it actually broke open something in my cognitive system, you know, in terms of finding answers from nowhere. So deliberately doing that and just staying motivated and hopeful about what you do. And, you know, so even when I'm practicing the guitar, for instance, I watch like all these videos about like Kobe Bryant talking about his work ethic and doing all the detailed things you have to do. And so it's important to stay focused and encouraged and know what you want to do. And don't let, I was watching this video earlier today, actually, of J.K. Rowling, you know, when she had just finished the second Harry Potter book, you know, and she was just talking about being like, you know, a single mom and, you know, and knowing that she had to get this book finished before she started teaching because she knew that she wouldn't have time. But she knew she needed time to do this thing right, you know. And so that's another kind of thing that seems a bit counterintuitive, is that sometimes to do the thing that you need to do very well, you have to almost put up with whatever you have to put up with to do the thing right. You know, if you have to stay on your parents' couch, you know what I mean, and live on ramen noodles, you know what I mean? Like Cormac McCarthy, before he became like this, you know, well-known novelist, you know, he just lived in a trailer and lived off peanut butter sandwiches. You know what I mean? If you really want to do what you do, you have to actually go all the way with it,
Right.
because that's when you'll create something that's as special. And it may be difficult. You may have to have sacrifices, but it's worth it to do. Or like Charles Bukowski, you know, living on one payday chocolate bar a day because he knew he had to write. That was the most important thing. So if you have a thing that's in you and you have your own turbine, you have to trust that, even though it might seem counterintuitive, and in the short term, it may not be the most lucrative thing financially or whatever, but you have to do it all the way. And that can be difficult, you know, especially if you have, like, I had a young family, but thankfully I had this very supportive wife who knew I had genuine talent, you know, and she supports me through thick and thin, you know. So that's the only advice really I can
Oh, that's terrific.
you know.
That's terrific. And even though you won't do this self-promotion, I'm going to promote for you. Please check out Alan's work. You can go to Alan Mearns. It's Mearn, even though we say
Mearns never learns.
Mearns never learns. And so go to check out his website and see why Rick Beato said, as he called you, an unknown musical genius. And I'm going to say that for you, because we are so proud of you, and glad that you came into our existence here at Austin Peay. We're thankful for that.
I'm very, very grateful for Austin Peay helping me go to graduate school, and for Stanley Yates helping him be who he is, and for Jeff Wood too, who's an amazing person when I was there taking composition lessons. Really added to my world, you know.
Well, it's been great talking with you, Alan.
All right, Buzz.
And thanks to all our viewers and listeners out there for checking out the podcast. We hope that you will continue to watch as we profile some of the outstanding alumni we have here in the College of Arts and Letters at Austin Peay State University. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.